Are you seriously going to leave them out there? In the cold? They're just dogs. Emily snapped as her neighbor shrugged, shutting his door in her face. Not my problem, he muttered, disappearing inside. The sound of the lock clicking felt louder than the night itself. Disgusted, Emily stood frozen on her porch, her breath visible in the icy air, staring at the desperate scratches against her door. She knew the world could be cruel. But this was heartless. She swallowed hard, her heart pounding as she turned back to face the shadows of the street. The sound of the scratching continued, urgent, frantic, and pleading. She stood at her door, her hand hesitating on the knob. Outside someone was desperately trying to get her attention. The sound wasn't just noise. It carried a story, one Emily couldn't yet decipher. Could be a raccoon, she whispered to herself, trying to calm her nerves. But deep down, she knew better. Animals didn't scratch like that. The sound was deliberate, intelligent even. Her mind raced with possibilities. Was it safe to open the door? What if it wasn't an animal? What if it was someone dangerous? But then she heard it. A faint, high-pitched whimper. Not one, but several. It pierced the stillness, tugging at something deep inside her. She could almost feel the fear in those tiny cries. Summoning her courage, Emily unlocked the door and pulled it open just enough to peer outside. Her breath caught in her throat. There, in the glow of her porch light, stood a trembling German shepherd, her fur matted and damp. She was thin, her ribs faintly visible beneath her coat. 5 tiny puppies huddled at her feet, their small bodies pressed against hers for warmth. Emily's gaze dropped to the mother dog's neck, where a frayed collar hung loosely. A scrap of paper was tucked into it, barely held in place. The dog's eyes locked with Emily's, and for a moment, it was as if the animal was speaking to her, pleading, begging. "Good Lord," Emily murmured, opening the door wider. The mother dog limped forward cautiously, favoring her back leg. Her puppies stumbled after her, their tiny paws slipping on the icy concrete. Emily's heart ached at the sight. She crouched low, extending a hand. "It's okay, girl. I'm here," she said softly, her voice trembling. The dog hesitated but didn't back away. Slowly, she sniffed Emily's hand before nuzzling it, a small act of trust that felt monumental. As Emily gently touched the note tucked into the collar, she noticed something else. Faint bruises along the dog's neck, as if the collar had been pulled too tight for too long. Her stomach churned with a mix of anger and sadness. She unfolded the note, her fingers shaking. The handwriting was hurried, almost illegible, but the words were clear enough to send a chill down her spine. "Please help them. I couldn't keep them safe anymore." Emily looked back at the dog, whose eyes seemed to say everything the note couldn't. The night air was biting, carrying the faint scent of damp fur and desperation. The puppies whimpered softly, their tiny bodies trembling against the cold. Emily could feel the weight of the mother dog's exhaustion. Her breathing labored and uneven. The world seemed to narrow down to this one moment, this one choice. Emily knew she couldn't leave them out here, but the enormity of what lay ahead pressed heavily on her chest. Emily crouched lower, speaking softly. "Come on, sweet girl. Let's get you and your babies inside." The dog hesitated, her instincts warring with her exhaustion. She looked back at her puppies, nudging them forward with her nose, as if urging them to follow. One by one, they stumbled toward Emily, their tiny tails wagging uncertainly. The mother dog followed, her steps faltering but determined. Inside, Emily quickly set to work. She grabbed old towels, blankets, and bowls of water. The puppies eagerly drank, their tiny tongues lapping noisily. The mother dog watched them intently, her body tense, as if expecting the worst at any moment. Emily turned her attention back to the note, her mind racing. Who had written it? And what kind of danger had they been running from? She looked at the dog's collar again, noticing faint etchings on the metal tag. It wasn't a name or address, just a string of numbers and letters that made no sense. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden noise outside, a faint rustling, followed by the creak of her front gate. Emily froze, her heart pounding. Was someone out there? And more importantly, had they come for the dog? The warm glow of Emily's living room felt worlds apart from the icy darkness outside. The crackling fire cast flickering shadows on the walls, and the scent of burning wood mingled with the faint musk of damp fur. Emily had gathered every blanket she could find, arranging them into a makeshift nest near the hearth. The German shepherd, whom Emily decided to call Luna, lay cautiously at the edge of the blankets, her body a shield for her puppies. The 5 little ones nestled together, their tiny snores a soft, rhythmic backdrop to the quiet room. Emily sat cross-legged on the floor, watching the scene unfold. Luna's wary eyes never left her, though there was a flicker of something else. Curiosity, perhaps? Trust would take time. Emily knew that. But the fact that Luna hadn't bolted was a start. As she sat there, memories began to surface. It had been years since Emily had closed the doors of her animal rescue shelter, a place that had once been her life's work. Back then, she had been known for her unwavering determination, her ability to coax even the most terrified animals into safety. But it only took one tragedy to shatter that confidence. A dog named Max, a sweet but deeply traumatized mutt, had slipped through her fingers. She had done everything she could to rehabilitate him, but one night he escaped. The call came the next morning. Max had been hit by a car. The guilt had been unbearable. Emily had blamed herself, convinced that she wasn't cut out for rescue work after all. She had shut down the shelter, retreating into a life of quiet isolation. Until tonight, she glanced at Luna, who was now resting her head on her paws. The parallels were impossible to ignore. Emily reached for a bowl of warm water and a soft cloth. "All right, Luna," she murmured, keeping her tone gentle. "Let's take a look at that leg." Luna stiffened as Emily approached, her ears pinning back slightly. But she didn't growl or retreat. Emily moved slowly, giving Luna time to adjust. The bruises on Luna's neck and the deep scratches on her leg told a story of hardship and survival. Emily worked carefully, cleaning the wounds and applying a soothing balm. Luna winced but didn't pull away, her trust growing with each gentle touch. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" Emily whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "You've been through so much." As if in response, Luna shifted slightly, her body relaxing just enough for Emily to continue. The puppies, now more comfortable in their new surroundings, began to explore. One particularly adventurous pup, a tiny black and white ball of fluff, tugged at the edge of Emily's blanket. Another climbed onto Luna's back, eliciting a soft, tired huff from the mother dog. Emily chuckled despite herself. "Looks like I've got my hands full," she said, glancing at Luna. Luna's watchful gaze softened, and for the first time, Emily thought she saw a glimmer of gratitude in those amber eyes. Once Luna and the puppies were settled, Emily turned her attention back to the note. She smoothed out the crumpled paper, her eyes scanning the hurried scrawl. "Please help them. I couldn't keep them safe anymore." The words were haunting. Who had written them? And why had they abandoned Luna and her puppies in such a state? Emily's gaze drifted back to Luna. The bruises, the scratches, the frayed collar. Everything pointed to a life of hardship. But the note hinted at something darker, something more deliberate. "What were you running from, girl?" Emily murmured. Luna's ears perked up slightly at the sound of her voice, but she remained still, her breathing deep and steady. Emily picked up Luna's collar, turning it over in her hands. It was old and worn, the leather cracked and faded. But something caught her eye, a faint engraving on the metal tag. She squinted, holding it closer to the light. The letters and numbers were barely legible, but they were there, a series of random characters that seemed meaningless at first glance. Emily's mind raced. Was it a code? An address? A serial number? She grabbed her phone, snapping a picture of the engraving to send to a friend who might be able to help. Just as she was about to sit back down, a sudden knock echoed through the house. Emily froze, her heart pounding. She glanced at the clock. It was well past midnight. Who could possibly be at her door at this hour? Luna's ears shot up, and a low growl rumbled in her throat. She moved to stand, positioning herself between the door and her puppies. Emily's hands trembled as she approached the window, her breath shallow. She peered through the curtains, her heart racing. In the dim light of the porch, she saw a figure retreating into the darkness. The person moved quickly, their face obscured by a hood. Emily's stomach churned. Had they been watching her house? Had they come for Luna? She stepped back from the window, her mind spinning. Luna's growl softened into a whimper, and she nudged Emily's hand as if sensing her distress. "It's okay," Emily whispered, though she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. The night stretched on, the silence broken only by the crackle of the fire and the occasional whimper from the puppies. Emily sat awake, her thoughts racing. Whoever had been at her door, they weren't just a random passerby. And Emily had a sinking feeling that this was only the beginning. The first light of dawn seeped through the kitchen window, casting a soft golden hue on Emily's cluttered table. The comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, but Emily barely noticed as she sat hunched over, her fingers tracing the worn edges of Luna's collar. On the table in front of her lay the crumpled note, her phone, and a notebook where she'd begun scribbling her thoughts. The room was quiet except for the occasional crackle of the fire in the next room and the soft breathing of the puppies, now curled up in a basket Emily had lined with towels. Luna lay at her feet, her head resting on her paws. Though her body was still, her eyes followed Emily's every move. Emily picked up the collar again, turning it over carefully. The faint engraving she had noticed earlier nagged at her, the sequence of letters and numbers too deliberate to be random. "What are you hiding, girl?" Emily muttered to herself. She snapped a clearer picture of the engraving and texted it to her friend Clara, a former colleague who now worked in animal welfare. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed. Clara's response was short but chilling. "This looks like a registry code for a dogfighting operation. Call me ASAP." Emily's heart sank. She glanced down at Luna, who shifted slightly, as if sensing the weight of the moment. When Emily called Clara, her voice was calm but urgent. "Emily, you need to be careful. These codes are used by people who run underground dogfighting rings to track their assets. If Luna's collar has one, she's either escaped from them or was abandoned after being used." Emily's stomach churned. "What about the note?" Clara paused. "That's the odd part. It's not something these people usually do. If someone wrote it, they might have been trying to save her and the puppies." The implications were overwhelming. Luna wasn't just any stray. She was a survivor of something horrific. And now, whoever had owned her might come looking. Emily hung up the phone and leaned back in her chair, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She looked at Luna, who had risen to her feet and was nudging the basket of puppies closer to Emily. It was a subtle gesture, but its meaning was clear. Take care of them. They're what matters. Emily's chest tightened. Luna's trust, her willingness to let Emily into their world, was both humbling and heartbreaking. "Don't worry," Emily whispered, reaching down to stroke Luna's head. "I won't let anything happen to them. Or you." For the first time in years, Emily felt a spark of purpose reignite within her. She had failed Max, but she wouldn't fail Luna and her puppies. Later that day, as Emily stepped outside to retrieve the mail, a chill ran down her spine. Parked a few houses down was a dark van with tinted windows. It had been there the night before, and again that morning. The driver's face was obscured, but Emily could feel their gaze as she hurried back inside, her heart racing. She locked the door behind her and pulled the curtains closed. Am I being paranoid? She wondered. But deep down, she knew better. As the day wore on, Emily found herself pacing the living room, her mind spiraling. She thought back to the last time she had felt this helpless, when Max had escaped. She remembered the call from the shelter volunteer, the sound of her own voice breaking as she learned Max had been hit by a car. The guilt had consumed her, driving her to shut down the shelter and retreat from the world. But this time was different. She wasn't alone in this fight. Luna's steady presence, her unyielding focus on protecting her puppies, was a reminder that survival was possible, even in the face of unimaginable cruelty. Determined not to repeat her past mistakes, Emily began documenting everything. She took pictures of Luna's injuries, the puppies, the collar, and the van outside. She also reached out to the local authorities, though their response was lukewarm at best. They'll only act if there's an immediate threat, Clara had warned her earlier. But keep pushing, and don't let your guard down. That evening, as Emily sat in the living room with Luna and the puppies, the sound of an engine idling outside caught her attention. She peered through a gap in the curtains and saw the van again. This time, the driver stepped out, a tall figure in a dark hoodie. They didn't approach the house, but lingered near the van, scanning the street. Emily's pulse quickened. She grabbed her phone and snapped a picture through the curtains. Luna, sensing her tension, let out a low growl and positioned herself in front of the basket. The figure eventually got back into the van and drove away. But Emily knew this wasn't over. Later that night, as Emily was getting ready for bed, her phone buzzed with a new message. The text was from an unknown number. "You have something that belongs to us." Emily's blood ran cold. She stared at the screen, her mind racing. Who were they? How did they know she had Luna and the puppies? Luna patted over, her head nudging Emily's hand. Her steady presence was a reminder that fear wouldn't solve anything. Taking a deep breath, Emily texted Clara, "I think they found us." The house was dark, every light intentionally extinguished except for the faint glow of the fireplace. Emily sat by the window, her heart racing as she peered out into the shadowy street. The air outside was thick with tension, the stillness broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Beside her, Luna was alert, her ears perked and her eyes trained on the door. The puppies, sensing their mother's unease, huddled quietly in their basket. Emily's phone was clutched tightly in her hand, a direct line to the local authorities already dialed in, her thumb hovering over the call button. She glanced at the clock. It was just past midnight, the time when the shadowy figure had last appeared. A sudden noise, a faint crunch of gravel, sent a jolt through Emily. She squinted into the darkness and saw movement near the edge of her property. A figure emerged, cloaked in shadows, their face obscured by a hood. Luna let out a low, guttural growl, her body tense and ready to pounce. Emily placed a calming hand on her back, whispering, "Not yet, girl. Stay with me." The figure moved closer, their steps deliberate. They stopped at the porch, lingering just out of view of the front window. Emily's heart thundered in her chest as she gripped the bat she had placed beside her chair. Summoning every ounce of courage, Emily unlocked the door and stepped outside. The cold night air bit at her skin, but she barely noticed. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, they took a step closer, the dim light from the porch lamp revealing a man with a hardened expression. "I'm here for the dog," he said flatly. Emily tightened her grip on the bat. "She's not yours anymore." The man sneered. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. Hand her over, and no one gets hurt." Behind her, Luna stepped forward, her growl deepening. The man's eyes flicked to the dog, his demeanor shifting. "Call her off," he barked. "Not a chance," Emily shot back. The man lunged forward, reaching for Emily. But before he could get close, Luna launched herself at him with a ferocity Emily hadn't seen before. The man stumbled backward, his arm raised defensively as Luna snapped and growled, keeping him at bay. Emily scrambled to call the authorities, her voice urgent but controlled. "He's here." The man from the van. "He's trying to take the dog." The man tried to shove Luna away, but she was relentless, her protective instincts driving her to fight. Emily grabbed the bat and stepped forward, her own fear replaced by a surge of adrenaline. "Leave now," she shouted, raising the bat. The man hesitated, clearly unprepared for the combined fury of Luna and Emily. Just as he turned to retreat, the distant sound of sirens filled the air. The man froze, his head snapping toward the approaching sound. Seconds later, flashing blue and red lights illuminated the street as two police cars pulled up. Officers quickly surrounded the man, who dropped to his knees, his hands raised in surrender. Emily exhaled a shaky breath, her knees threatening to buckle as the tension finally broke. Luna returned to her side, her breathing heavy but her stance proud. Emily knelt to stroke her fur, whispering, "You did it, girl. You kept us safe. As the officers escorted the man to a squad car, another team searched the van parked nearby. Inside, they found a grim collection of tools and cages, confirming Emily's worst fears. The van was a mobile unit for transporting dogs used in illegal fights. One officer approached Emily, his expression serious, but kind. "You've done the right thing, ma'am. We'll take it from here." The next morning, the house was quiet again, the chaos of the night before replaced by a peaceful calm. Emily sat on the porch, a cup of coffee in hand, as she watched Luna and her puppies explore the backyard. The puppies, now more confident, tumbled over each other in the grass, their tiny tails wagging with joy. Luna lay nearby, her eyes half closed but always watchful. Emily felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since Max's death, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. As she watched the puppies play, Emily thought about the rescue shelter she had abandoned years ago. She had convinced herself she wasn't strong enough to continue, that the pain of failure outweighed the joy of success. But Luna had changed that. The dog's courage, her unwavering love for her puppies, had reminded Emily of why she had started rescuing animals in the first place. She stood, a newfound determination settling over her. "It's time," she murmured to herself. In the weeks that followed, Emily began laying the groundwork to reopen her shelter. She reached out to old colleagues, rallied support from the community, and began transforming her home into a safe haven for animals in need. Luna became a symbol of the shelter's mission, her story inspiring others to get involved. The puppies, once timid and frail, grew into playful bundles of energy, each one eventually finding a loving home. One sunny afternoon, Emily sat in the backyard, watching Luna bask in the sun. The dog's scars had faded, her once gaunt frame now healthy and strong. The sound of children's laughter drew Emily's attention. Two of the puppies, now adopted by a family down the street, had come to visit. They bounded into the yard, tails wagging as they reunited with their mother. Emily smiled, her heart full. Luna turned to her, their eyes meeting in a moment of unspoken understanding. "You saved me as much as I saved you," Emily whispered. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Emily knew this was just the beginning. With Luna by her side, she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead.